In this video, we're going to be talking about the optical focusing systems of our camera. In this case, the Canon T6s and the T6i. Far superior for shooting sports as you look through the viewfinder. In a later lesson, we'll be talking about live view focusing, which uses the monitor, and it has its time and place. Now, if you are a pure beginner, the focusing systems are going to feel a little overwhelming. We're talking about 3 different focusing modes, 3 different focusing clusters, 19 focusing squares, and several different buttons and controls in order to manipulate them. Get your camera and follow along with these exercises. Think of the focusing systems in terms of the how, the when, and the where the camera is focusing. If you can remember these 3 terms, this is going to be simple. How does the camera focus? Out of the box, we push the shutter button halfway down. This engages the focusing systems, and when we push the shutter button down all the way, it'll take a picture. Pretty straightforward. Let's talk about the focusing modes, and this is when the camera is focusing. In order to access them, we're going to press the information button until we see the LCD control panel in the back. You can press your Q button. Down here in the bottom left-hand corner, press this and we'll see the 3 different modes. We have one shot, AI focus, and AI servo. One shot means that the camera is going to focus one time, and when it gets focus lock, it is going to stop focusing. Now, out of the box, the camera will typically make a beep, and if you look through the viewfinder, when this happens, you will also see a green circle light up in the bottom right-hand corner of the viewfinder. Go ahead and test it out. Look through your viewfinder, push your shutter button down halfway. Do you hear it? Get that focus lock. And the amazing thing about one shot is as long as you're holding that shutter button halfway down, you can move the camera around and it is not going to change its focus. This is very useful when shooting portraits. It allows you to get a focus lock on your subject and then recompose the camera to make it more aesthetically pleasing, pushing the shutter button down all the way to take the picture. We'll be covering that technique a little bit later on in the video. Let's change our camera to AI Servo. AI Servo means artificial intelligence servo focusing, which means over and over and over again. This is a predictive focus, which means the camera is going to try to guesstimate where your subject is by the time you push the shutter button down all the way. Something that you'll notice about this when you look through the viewfinder is you do not get a beep and there is no focus lock indicated. It's more of this flashing green circle. This means it is a predictive focus. Now, all of these shots are not going to be perfectly tack sharp, but if you're dealing with moving subjects, sports shooting in particular, small children that run around, maybe fast cars, birds in flight, this is the mode that you're going to want, and most of your shots will be in focus. So we have one shot for still subjects, we have AI servo for those subjects that are constantly moving. The last mode, AI focus, is a hybrid of the first 2. When I shot weddings, this was the mode I typically used because the bride would be walking down the aisle, and now she's stopped, and now she's dancing, and now she's cutting a cake, and now she's leaving. So when we have subjects that are moving and stopping and moving and stopping, AI focus tends to be the mode that I use the most. Now, if you change it over to AI focus and look through the viewfinder and do a halfway shutter depression, you will see that you do get focus lock and we get a beep indicating that. So it's a hybrid of the 2. So how do we focus? Halfway shutter depression. When does the camera focus? It's one of those 3 modes, one shot, servo, or AI focus. Let's talk about the where the camera is focusing. In this case, the focusing squares. Now there's 2 parts to this. There's the actual clusters themselves, and these can be toggled by pressing this top left button on the top of your camera. It's referred to as the AF area selector. I call it the cluster button. So if you look through your viewfinder and you push this button repeatedly, on the very top of your monitor, you're going to see a red triangle sliding underneath these 3 icons. On the far left, we have single square, the middle is zone, and the last one is autofocus with all 19 points. I don't recommend ever using that simply because the camera is going to pick the closest subject to you and focus on that. You don't have a lot of creative control in that particular cluster. The two that I use the most are single square, use it 90% of the time, and then I also use the zone when I'm shooting sports, particularly fast-moving subjects, birds in flight, because sometimes it's very hard to keep a single focusing square on a very small subject that's moving quickly. The zone focusing cluster will essentially look for an area of contrast in a certain area and then allow the camera to lock onto that. Most of the time, however, I am shooting on the single square. Now, if you've used the autofocus area selector button, once you have the cluster you want, you can use the directional pad on the back of your camera to select which focusing square you want to use. Go ahead and try that out and push the directional pad in any direction. You'll see that the square moves. Now, once you take a picture, you'll notice that if you go back and you try to change your focusing square, it won't work. It doesn't highlight. So how do you change your focusing square without changing your cluster? Great question. Top right-hand thumb button. This is the autofocus square selector. Push it once, you will get the red highlight, and then you can go back and select the squares that you want. And that is how you change the where. So in summary, how do we focus? We push the shutter button halfway down. When does the camera focus? One shot is a single focus lock. AI Servo is a repeated focus. AI Focus is a hybrid of the two. The focusing clusters can be toggled with the cluster button on the top of the camera, and our points can be selected by using the directional pad, and we can change them while shooting by pushing the top right thumb button and again going back to the directional pad. Now, I know many of you are pure beginners and you're just getting used to your camera. I know you have a lot on your plate already. If you become more advanced sports shooters and you're looking for a really good technique to master sports shooting, something you need to look at is called back button focusing. Essentially what it does is it removes the focusing mechanism to the exposure lock button on the back of the camera. It's the inside thumb button. This is great because it separates the dual mechanism of the shutter button, which means that you can engage the focusing systems by pressing the exposure lock button, and by lifting your thumb up, it disengages them. You can shoot at any time, whether or not the focusing systems are engaged or not. One of the limits of having the focusing system built into the shutter button is that in order to take a picture, you have to push through that focusing point, and sometimes the camera will focus on something you don't want. Again, a little bit more of an advanced feature, but definitely check it out if you're interested. It's in your custom menu, item 10. You're going to select position 1, and that will allow you to use back button focusing. Now, if you found this video to be helpful, you may be a visual learner who prefers to watch somebody else instead of reading from a manual. I'm the same way. You'll be happy to know that I have an excellent crash course video on the T6i and the T6s, over 4 hours of lessons just like this. This is the video I wish I would have had when I was first getting started. If this interests you, I'll put the links in the description as well as at the end of the video. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you next time.